All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Best-selling author Callan Wink will discuss his new novel, Beartooth, in conversation with author Kevin Powers in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. So Kevin Powers was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. Since publishing his first novel in 2012, his books have been translated into more than a dozen languages. He has been a finalist for the National Book Award and a recipient of the Penn Hemingway Award, the Guardian First Book Award, and lots of other awards and recognitions, some of which I can't pronounce. He was a James Michener Fellow in Poetry at the University of Texas at Austin from 2009 to 2012, and later held a there's another word I can't pronounce, Guggenheim Fellowship in Fiction. A U.S. Army veteran of the war in Iraq, Kevin now lives on Florida's First Coast with his family. So thank you for your service, Kevin, and thank you for being here tonight. And Callan Wink has been awarded fellowships by the National Endowment for the Arts and Stanford University, where he was a Wallace Stegner Fellow. His stories and essays have been published in The New Yorker, Granta, Playboy, Men's Journal, and the Best American Short Stories. He is the author of a novel, August, and a collection of short stories, Dog Run Moon. His latest, which he'll be discussing tonight, is the aforementioned Beartooth. And he lives in Livingston, Montana, where he is a fly fishing guide on the Yellowstone River. So, folks, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Callan and Kevin for being with us today. And Kevin, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Robert. I really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody who's joining us. I'm really excited to be here. I was sent an advanced copy of Callan's book maybe 6 months ago. And as I tend to do when I get advanced copies, I usually open the first page and just kind of take a look at the writing. And with Callan's book, I found myself just standing there reading the entire first chapter. And I got to the end of the first chapter and it says, the quicker this got done, the quicker they could get the hell out of there, collect their money, and put this whole thing behind them. And as soon as I read that, I said, I think I need to sit down. So I sat down in my chair and I actually didn't get up again until I had finished the book. It's an extraordinary reading experience. I think everybody who reads it is going to absolutely love it as much as I did. In fact, as soon as I finished the book, I called a writer friend of mine and extolled the virtues of the book and used some exclamatory phrasing that I won't repeat here, but just to give you a sense of how excited I was. It was one of those reading experiences that only happens once every few years, at least for me. So this is the first time I've gotten a chance to meet Callan and congratulate Callan on writing this exceptional book. And I'm sure you're all curious, as I am. I'd love to hear just a little bit about kind of where you're from, your journey as a reader, how that led to you becoming a writer, and how that led to you writing this book, Beartooth.
Yeah, and just first off, thanks so much for doing this and talking to me. Like we were talking about earlier, I've been a big fan of your work since I read The Yellow Birds, and thanks to everyone who's tuning in. But yeah, so in short, I grew up in a very small town in kind of the western part of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. Grew up kind of out in the woods, hunting, fishing. My parents made the decision to raise my sisters and I with no television in the house. I mean, we didn't have the internet, didn't have a cell phone. I mean, this was, a while ago now, but basically we read a lot. And we would go to the little local library once a week and I would get a stack of, just, it wasn't like I was reading the classics or anything, paperback Westerns, whatever. It was entertainment basically. Reading was just a huge part of my life. I probably peaked as a reader when I was like 16 years old, to be honest, in terms of just like sheer amount of time spent. But, and I mean, I can't speak for all writers, but I think a lot of writers, come to it from the reading background, but, never thought the writing was going to be definitely not a career. Still, jury's still kind of out on that one, to tell you the truth. I've been a fishing guide for over 20 years. I moved to Montana right after high school. Got a job on a dude ranch east of Missoula, Montana. and just kind of stayed basically after that summer was up. And eventually I moved down to Livingston, where I've been for the last 20 years, and I guide on the Yellowstone River. So the fly fishing is most of my work life, really. The writing is something I sort of do in the off season. And I try to make it work. I like this split. It's a good split for me. When I'm done with the fishing season, I'm pretty ready to write. And then when I'm done writing, I'm really ready to like not look at the computer and go row a boat for the summer. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's, I mean, such an extraordinary tradition of Western writers, and not in this case writers of Westerns, but writers who either live or write especially about the Rockies or Western states, like Norman Maclean, somebody that I really admire. Stegner, who you had a fellowship in his name. In her time, Willa Cather, we know, was considered a big Western writer. Tom McGuane, Rick Bass. Are these people that you encountered early on? Do you kind of see yourself as joining this tradition, or are you really just sort of doing your own thing, independent of that?
Yeah, I mean, those are all writers I admire, and I'm definitely conscious of writing about and from the West. I mean, there is a tradition there. I think there, at least I can't speak for everybody, but for me, writing in a place like Montana, you do feel sort of like much of the publishing world is happening elsewhere, and there's this term that I sort of hate that always comes up when people talk about writers writing in the Midwest or the West, which is the flyover states, whatever that means actually. And anyway, I think maybe I've had a little chip on my shoulder about that over the years. But I think living in the West is just such a great place to generate story for a number of different reasons. But the tradition is wonderful. I mean, all the people you named are people I've read and admired, and in addition, others. Richard Ford, some of his early short stories were really sort of instrumental in my early short story writing career, especially. Jim Harrison, another one who I knew personally pretty well. I took him fishing for many years. He lived in Livingston. So yeah, there are a ton. Annie Proulx as well. So many of them, and yeah, hopefully my name is a small footnote in that list someday. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I have a hunch that it probably will be. It's interesting. It's one of the kind of thematic things that I noticed in Beartooth, and we'll get into this maybe a little bit more, is that sort of sense of uh, kind of being on the edge of the wilderness, and the way that it sort of influences how you interact with the world, and kind of feeling of separation from I don't know, other parts of the country or cultural centers or whatever. It's I'll get to the question I have about that a little later, but my initial reaction to reading your novel, I was reminded of this saying, and I don't know if it's real or where I actually heard it, but this idea, like the world is this kind of monster, and you either have to learn to ride it, or it's gonna kill you. And the two brothers in your book, Dad and Hazen, they both seem to be balanced, but sort of balanced in different directions on those two sort of possible outcomes. I mean, does that sort of ring true to you? I mean, he's kind of got his hands on the wheel a little bit. Hazen's just kind of a little more detached. Can you talk about their relationship and how you sort of develop those characters?
Yeah, I mean, the brothers, they're close in age. Thad is a year older. And at the beginning of the novel, their father has just died, and as a result, they're left with a kind of crushing financial debt, medical bills, a house that's sort of falling down, and Thad, as I think is often the case with older siblings, has this sort of he feels this responsibility to keep his younger brother Hazen, who is a little bit more impulsive and sort of prone to making poor decisions, keeping Hazen out of trouble in line, and also getting them out of this situation that they've found themselves in. And so I think, especially with both the brothers, I think sort of their arc as the story goes, from beginning to end, a lot of it has to do with their relationship to each other in the end, without giving it away for everyone who hasn't read it. But they're sort of forced to become separate units or separate entities when they've been sort of this unit their whole life. And how they deal with that, it has a large part to do with sort of the way their character is portrayed in the novel.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about the origin of the story. I mean, it's in a lot of ways a kind of classic caper story that eventually kind of mutates into something else. But I mean, you execute the narrative so perfectly, but you're also in touch with something deeper. You're talking about family, as you said, these relationships, the relationship to the landscape, a certain kind of precarity. And in those areas, I mean, you provide these extraordinary details, like you mentioned the financial distress that they're in. And at one point, just, so readers get a sense of just the keen eye that Callan has. Dad just gets so tired of getting these bills that he goes out and cuts his mailbox down with a chainsaw. So I was just wondering, how do you focus your energy on creating this propulsive caper story, but also uh, giving these characters kind of inner lives that change as they experience different things? I mean, what was that process like of nailing the story down?
Yeah, I mean, I think I never set out to write sort of a thriller or a caper story. The sort of premise of the novel I've had for a long time. It sort of was honestly based on something I overheard in a bar years ago in Montana, and I don't know if the sort of premise actually happened. I never really tried to look into it. It was just sort of this tall tale I heard and thought it would make a great novel. And so I had that sort of the heist element sort of in my head for a long time. But as the novel progressed, it went through a lot of different forms. It was a short story, a long, kind of boring novel, then a novella, and then a kind of a short novel where it is now. As I was working on it, I think what came to the forefront was more the relationship between the family members. And it's sort I can't say that was my plan. It just sort of developed as I was writing the characters.
Yeah. Well, you do those familial relationships so amazingly well. And I was going through the story and seeing how, kind of getting a deeper understanding of Dad and Hazen's relationship. I mean, I was reminded of the brothers and A River Runs Through It, because Dad is a kind of, as you say, in that sort of protective position. He's, saving his brother from beatings, from fires that he started, all these things. But you can also feel, as a reader, you can really feel the weight of that responsibility and the kind of burgeoning and probably in some senses long-standing resentment. So that relationship is so finely drawn. And then their mother shows up, and she's such an extraordinary character. And in addition to this dynamic that I found so fascinating, she's kind of taking this third path, I guess, if you want to think of the way that they're approaching life, sort of on the edge of stability. Um, how did you develop her? Because she's sort of, crystal power, earthy, crunchy, but
The
she's also
hippie.
got this fascinating independent streak. I'd love to hear you talk about Sacagawea.
Yeah. So as a character, she, I think as you kind of mentioned, her return, her sudden return. I mean, having characters appear usually with some sort of request from the other characters is such a great way to get story going. Like Charles Baxter had this essay on writing where he talked about it, like, there's something I need you to do. You know, a character comes and asks that of the other characters, and it's sort of a catalyzing force. She doesn't necessarily ask them to do anything, but just her presence there. Thad has a lot more resentment, and Hazen is more willing to forgive, and it's a huge source of tension for the two of them. And I think as Thad kind of experiences the events of the narrative, his attitudes towards his mother change in a lot of ways. I think, I mean, in my editing process over the years of working on this, I think the character of Sacagawea became more important in the story. You know, early on, she was just this sort of absent figure, but as I kept working on it, I realized she needed to be in there more, if for no other reason than to see Thad's change, you know.
Yeah.
And it's another sort of instance of these sort of the bonds of family, like where they blur into like burdens, you know. And at what point do you let them go, or do you kind of lean in and embrace what maybe you should do?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the book explores those family dynamics, kind of what we owe to the people we're connected to, not necessarily by choice. And you capture that intimate friction really extraordinarily. And again, the details that you choose to, you know, to write are just so perfect. Again, there's a moment where, you know, thinking of like nominative determinism, where Thad has this thought that if only his mother had been named Melissa, he might have had a normal life, which I love that. And it felt so, you know, it's perfectly telling detail about Thad's character. You know, you mentioned that at one point in your writing of the novel that their mother was sort of a more absent figure, and in a weird way, you talked about how as the book opens, you know, their father is recently deceased, but he's a huge presence in the book, especially for, you know, Thad is sort of always thinking, what would our father say? You know, what would he how would he react to this? Can you talk about the way that that figure sort of became this I don't know if he's the sort of silent conscience of the book, or how you thought of him.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what the brothers are up to is very ethically questionable, and you know, having Thad sort of reflect upon his father, and um, you know, it adds just this element of a guilt, I suppose. And yeah, if anything, the absent or the dead father is kind of the moral compass that Thad is struggling to follow at times, in the face of you know, trying to survive, basically, financially, and you know, in a world where like they're one broken down truck away from just sort of financial ruin. And so I guess it was something I was interested in writing this, just how like close um, a lot of people in the country sort of live to that edge, where just like one medical bill, one, you know, car malfunction, and their world is sort of crumbling down around them, and then sort of the choices you have to make then at that point.
Yeah. No, I mean it's really effectively done. I mean the just that some of the kind of inciting incidents are something as simple as the roof starts leaking, you know, and
Mm.
that, as you say, that becomes this crucial motivation. Um, I mean, it is. I do want to avoid spoilers, so you know, talk to me as much or as little detail of the caper as you want. But you know, I mentioned before you talked about like flyover country and certain things happening in other places, but I thought it was really interesting in that both of the crimes, I guess, that we're privy to in the book, you know, the poaching of bears out of season, and then the shed antlers. You're showing us the way that the natural world is kind of being commodified and exoticized for the benefit of people who live really far away from where Thad and Hazen live, and they're, I'm assuming, not struggling in the way that they are, and yet they're almost forced to kind of take part in this strange economy. Um, what is their relationship to the world kind of outside that landscape? And is that something that you wanted us to be conscious of as readers?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely like kind of this background noise that is present, and you know the brothers are definitely aware of it. The sort of economic disparity. I mean, the house or the property next to theirs, you know, has been purchased by you know a wealthy out of stater for second or third home purposes and that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean it is such a big part of the area I live. I mean the novel is set basically down the road from where I'm sitting right now, and
Right.
it's something I'm like thinking more and more of. I mean, it's not a novel that gets overtly political probably in any way, and partially on purpose in that you know these characters, I mean, it's not that they're not aware of what's going on in the outside world. There is this sort of myopic sort of, I have to go to work tomorrow and cut X number of cords of firewood in order to, you know, fill the propane tank, that sort of thing. So the immediate concern, I guess, is what I wanted to come to the forefront.
Yeah, no. I mean, it was very subtly done. It was something that I just got to thinking about. But I thought it was uh, certainly interesting commentary, absolutely, but not in any sense didactic or anything like that. So they get this opportunity. As the story begins, as I said, these guys are basically poaching. They're working for a man called the Scot, and he's such a fascinating character. Again, without giving too much away of the plot, he does play a huge role in the sort of the trouble that they end up in. I mean, who do you see the Scot as? Because in some ways, he's also an outsider.
Mhm. Yeah, you know, he he's a bagpipe playing villain on one hand, you know, which growing up, my father played the bagpipes, so I've always just had this sort of, you know, affinity for the instrument, which I've since found that other people don't necessarily always share. But yeah, I mean, he's the character that has. He's the one that is asking the brothers, you know, this is something I want you to do. And he's a smart enough guy that he's able to sort of play the brothers against each other. He has this sort of ability to sort of read their dynamic and know that if he you know sort of approaches Hazen with this idea after Thad shoots him down, then you know Hazen might be likely to try to do it in such a way that doesn't end well, and knowing that Thad's going to get involved anyway. He's a bit of a manipulator, and you know he's the sort of link to this outside world where, like you were saying, this sort of commodification of certain things in the natural world. He is sort of the liaison to this other world that the brothers don't really have contact with, you know.
Right.
And he is not from the town. His background is sort of a mystery in and of itself. So
Yeah, and readers will discover this, but when you find out where he's actually from, it's sort of this perfect uh,
right.
realization. We've been talking about the plot and the characters, and I mean, it is an absolute page turner. But separate and apart from how engaging I found the story and the characters, I mean, I'm always someone who responds to beautiful writing. I found just the quality of your writing absolutely outstanding. There is a passage I asked Callan if he'd be willing to share this one. There was one passage that I thought was particularly exemplary of the kind of writing that you do in the books that's so extraordinary. If you wouldn't mind sharing that with the audience, I'd love to hear it in your voice personally.
Of course, happen to have my book right here. They stood looking down the creek as far as they could, which wasn't very far as the canyon made a sharp bend not too far downstream. The sound of the water was a loud, omnipresent force here, pulsing in an almost arterial manner, like the roar of blood in your ears when you're in an absolutely silent place. Like somewhere deep in the granite, a mountain heart was pumping its icy flow. There was something about nature that was twice told. The human vascular system resembled the drainages of mountains, resembled the branching prongs of a lightning strike, resembled the xylem and phloem of trees from roots all the way to the lacework veins of the leaves. It was something Thad had thought about, but had never been able to pin down. In the fall, the red and gold and copper of the streamside alders and cottonwoods and willows were reflected in the spawning colors of the brown trout. It was almost enough to instill some sort of a faith in a creator, some sort of a guiding hand, an artist with a limited palette. Things were so remarkably similar when it seemed like they should be more different. When stripped of hide and hair, a bare skeleton looked eerily like a human form. The colors of certain sunsets were the colors of fire devouring wood. The sparks sent up to the sky, perfect replicas of stars. Maybe it meant something, maybe it didn't. The human mind was a register of patterns. Whether or not those patterns existed outside the brain itself was another matter altogether.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely beautiful. And it's interesting. Thad mentioned it's something that he can't quite pin down, but I feel like you pinned down this extraordinary passage about the sort of interconnectedness of all things. And it's funny, maybe a month or two after I read your book, I came across this article about how slime molds are used by scientists to model galaxies.
Hmm.
And it made me go back to your book. It made me go back to that passage. I wanted to read that again and get that. I just feel like there's so much insight in that. So yeah, it was really lovely to hear you read that. Um, so without giving too much away, I mean the caper, the sort of jackpot that the brothers end up in, it ends up really costing Thad quite a bit. Hazen seems to sort of thrive in the aftermath. Can you talk about how that experience was so transformative to them and maybe a little bit about the different ways that they react to it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say for most of the brother's life, it's the situation where Thad is kind of leading the way in a lot of ways, making decisions, and that sort of thing. And as they're involved in this sort of heist, this caper, an accident befalls Thad, and then he's no longer able to take that leadership role. And as these things sometimes happen, Hazen is somewhat able to, kind of rise to the occasion in a way that probably proves to be empowering for him as he moves forward. He wants, after this event, he sort of develops this urge to do some things that he hasn't done. I mean, one as simple as just like getting his own vehicle. These are not like major steps for a lot of people, but just small ways in which he's sort of gaining his independence, and seeing that, I think affects Thad in a number of ways that he probably wouldn't have anticipated himself if you were to tell him that this might happen in the future. He has these questions of like, is his sort of behavior towards Hazen, his younger brother, kind of stemming from this sort of suppressed urge to keep him on his sort of leash, and maybe, so anyway, these questions all arise just based on a simple accident that forces a character to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, Thad certainly has to ask himself if he needs to be needed, if that's
exactly. Yes, that's a good way to put it.
a way that he defines himself. Again, I mean, this isn't a spoiler, but there's a there's a moment when a police officer is asking Thad about Hazen, and he's sort of saying, I mean, I guess in a way it could be construed as sort of insulting, but he's basically asking if he's normal. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
he
right.
says, he says to Thad, like, you seem like a normal guy. What's your brother's deal?
Yeah.
And I mean, I got where that impression could have come from. I mean, from the book, it makes sense why, a certain type of person would have that question about Hazen. But, there was also a part of me that thought, what if he's got it all figured out? And
Yeah,
I'm the
right.
one who, we're the ones who are doing it wrong. Uh,
Yeah.
he's such an interesting character, and in a lot of ways, unlike anybody I can recall reading about. I mean, his sort of life philosophy of why don't we just go fishing, and um, yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear you just sort of talk more about how you came up with him as a character and how you sort of see his approach to the world.
Yeah. I mean, I never wanted him to be a character that was uh like easily diagnosable, like, oh, he has this or whatever.
Right.
He's sort of he's a little feral, and probably of the two brothers, he is less able to function in the trappings of society. Not that Thad is any like that great at it himself, paying the bills and things like that. But Hazen is very adept at basically doing things in the wilderness, and it's something seems to have this sort of innate ability that even his brother recognizes, and he excels in that area. And it's just sort of like when he comes to town, the problems arise. And yeah, probably part of it is me just sort of like at times wishing wishing I didn't have to go to town. You know what I mean? But it was kind of an interesting character to write in that, at the end, even as the writer, I was kind of getting to this point, like you said, like maybe he is the one of the two brothers who actually has it kind of figured out, which was
Yeah.
surprising for me as a writer. That's not how it started, for sure, but it ended up that way.
Yeah, I mean, he was just a fascinating person to read about. And, when he does undergo that change, it's completely unexpected, but also, I mean, absolutely believable. When I asked you to read that passage, and we talked a little bit about this kind of way that the commodification of the natural world, and the involvement of the people who aren't necessarily the beneficiaries of that. I mean, those sort of are kind of, I saw them as sort of thematic motifs, and and there's a lot that these guys especially are up against. But in the end, I felt like I found a silver lining. I felt good at the end of the book, and I just wonder, kind of like tonally, they have tough lives, but how did you sort of think about the book just in terms of, not message? I mean, certainly that's not something that I mean to suggest, but how did you approach this story in terms of what you were hoping to leave the reader with, kind of on a big picture level?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is like a sort of oddly hopeful ending. It probably is close to a happy ending as I will ever come up with. But I mean, it may be not happy, but just not incredibly bleak. I mean, there you see a way. I think at the end, you see a way forward for both characters. And what that looks like, who knows, but it's not a complete dead end, where for much of the novel it probably is looking like that might be where it ends up for them. And I always like novels. I mean, probably this is an aesthetic thing where some people reading this will kind of hate the ending, quite honestly, where not everything is completely wrapped up, for sure. But it seems like, for me anyway, I like novels somewhat like this, where at the end, again, you can imagine a way forward for the characters and see, or at least kind of understand a way that they can continue living after your last page has been turned, even if it's not clearly stated on the page, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me personally, I thought the ending was extraordinary. Those last, I don't know, 10 pages, 15 pages, whatever it was or so. I just, you know, for me reading it and getting to the end, I was just so impressed that one, you had created, as you said, this really effective, engrossing thriller, but the choices that you made in terms of the characters and the way that they interact with each other and the way you sort of enlarged the scope. I mean, for me, it absolutely transcended genre, and I was a great admirer of it. If you haven't picked up on that
Thank
already,
you.
I know we don't have too much time left, but there's something I always like to do when I have a chance to talk to writers that I respect, and I'm sure the audience, hopefully anyway, will appreciate that. If there's one book that you could force people to read at gunpoint, what book would it be?
Okay.
And you can pick two or three if you want.
Yeah, all right. So, I feel like I've been saying this for years, but it's still true. I still love Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I've read it probably 15 times. I keep waiting to get like over it or have reread it and be like, it's not that good this time. As someone who went to an MFA program, at least when I was there, it was like sort of trendy to sort of like diss on Cormac McCarthy, and I get it, but that novel I think is one that will stand the test of time, and at least for me, it always affects me greatly when I read it. Another one I really love is a novel called Heaven and Hell by John Kalman Stephenson, an Icelandic writer. It's a fairly short novel about these guys working at this sort of rustic fishing camp in Iceland, and one of them is sort of infatuated with reading Paradise Lost, I believe, by Milton, and he's so like engrossed in it that he forgets his kind of waterproof outer gear, and they go out fishing, and he ends up dying, and his companion is sort of left to like wrestle with this. It's a really beautifully written book, and I really love it. I just recently read one that, maybe because it's fresh in my mind, I don't know if it's at gunpoint status yet, but I really did love it. Is Stuart Onan's A Prayer for the Dying. And I was talking about Cormac McCarthy. A lot of people have probably read McCarthy's The Road, apocalyptic sort of. A Prayer for the Dying makes The Road look like a cheery, like feel-good adventure story. I mean, it is bleak, but it is an amazing book set right after the Civil War in Wisconsin, in this small town. It's having like this outbreak of diphtheria, and there's a fire bearing down, and the main characters, the undertaker, the priest, and the constable all at once. It's a really amazing short novel. So those are three.
That's awesome. I'm a huge fan of Cormac McCarthy as well. But I'm gonna check out those other two, and I'm sure the audience is will be excited to do the same. I think we're about at the time for the audience to ask questions.
Yeah.
Robert, do you want to
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So first of all, Kevin, thanks for moderating a wonderful conversation between you and Callan. And folks, now's the time. If you have any comments or questions, you can get them into the chat or into the Q&A. And yes, let's try to avoid spoilers. So Joe writes, Callan, I was a student of yours at the Fly Fishing Guide School. I was ecstatic to see your name mentioned in my local library email. I'm halfway through Beartooth. It's fantastic. From now on, whenever I'm tying flies, I'll hear proper proportions provide a pleasing presentation.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It will go hand in hand with a line I was taught in the USMC: prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance.
Yeah.
And Joe wishes you all the best and hopes to see you on the water again someday.
Right on. Thanks for saying howdy, Joe. Yeah, the guide school is a great thing I've been doing for years, and about to start it up again here in a couple days. So be down on the Bighorn. So hopefully you're out there fishing, Joe. Nice to hear from you.
So Josh has a comment and question. Josh says, "Hey, Callan, I know you spend a good part of your year in surfy and beachy locations. Do these places and characters inspire stories for you like Montana does?"
That's a good one. I've been going to Santa Cruz, California to surf for about a decade. Although this year I did not go. I went to Costa Rica for the winter, and I'm almost to the point where I could maybe write a story set in Santa Cruz. I love it. It's kind of dreary enough in the winter and kind of gritty enough that I can envision. I've been there long enough now that I have kind of a little bit of an awareness of what's going on. Places like Costa Rica and Indonesia and Nicaragua that I've been, in the past few years for shorter amounts of time. I don't think I'm there yet. I was just talking about this the other day. Like if I can't name like the trees and like the birds I'm seeing for some weird reason, even if it's not necessarily in what I'm working on, I have a really hard time even getting started. I just feel like I'm a complete, imposter. So it might be a little more time before that stuff comes up. But
Karen,
you like to go surfing. Yeah.
So Karen had a comment. Karen finished your book, really loved the book. Initially did not love the ending, but after reflection and thinking about all of the possibilities, she now thinks it was a good ending. Okay.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. Yeah.
There you go. So Callan and Kevin, you can chime in on this one as well. But do you have any general writing advice for aspiring writers, including some that might be on the call right now?
I have one. Kevin, do you have one?
Yeah, I can think of something.
All right, I'll go first because mine's fresh. I heard this from my great writing teacher and great writer, Brad Watson, who unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, but had a big impact on me. And I think it's from the writer Isak Dinesen. It's something along the lines of write a little bit each day without hope and without despair. That's one thing it always stuck with me, and I try to do that myself.
Yeah, no, that's great. Mine is also from a writing teacher. I studied with the poet Dean Young, who unfortunately has also passed. And one of his favorite sayings was, "Write recklessly, revise ruthlessly."
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
And that's always come in handy to me. And I will say, just for anybody who's interested in tackling a project, my experience has been that finishing is the thing that differentiates you. A lot of people start, finishing is harder. So if you can be disciplined in your practice, just like Callan was saying, get a little bit done every day, keep going till there's an ending, you will have made the lion's share of the progress that you need to.
So, Callan, I think I know the answer to this question based on the fact that you talked about how the story was a novel and then a novella, then a short novel, then maybe it was going to be it was sort of all over the place initially as you were going through the process. But could you talk a little bit about your writing process? And Callan, I'm legally required to ask everyone that I have on the screen: are you a pantser or are you a plotter?
What was the first one? I got plotter.
Yeah, pantser. So in other words, you go by the seat of your pants.
Oh, I gotcha. All right.
All right.
Okay. Definitely a pantser. Yeah. Right. The times I've tried to sort of like make an outline or whatever, I feel like when I start writing, I'm just so like caught up in trying to get to the next bullet point on my outline that when I finish it, it just is like wooden, it's not organic in any way. I wish I had a formula though, that would make things a lot easier, but every time it sort of feels like it's going to be a miracle if it comes together.
And Callan, in general, how has the book been received? I know it's been out for a little while now. I did see that it got a star reviewed in Kirkus, and it got a lot of positive publicity from lots of different sources. I saw that it got a good review in the New York Times Book Review. Just in general, how's the book doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on a little book tour this past month and met a lot of great readers and booksellers and things like that. And yeah, it seems pretty positive. It's no complaints there. I had another good writing mentor in my life, Jim Harrison, and took him fishing for many years. And there's always a line that sticks with me that I think about when at this stage when I have something coming out. I was telling him, like, Jim, my first book is coming out, and he was like, well, don't expect him to throw a parade for you in New York City. That's kind of how I always feel when in the rare occasion I publish something is no one else probably cares about it as much as I do. So you got to enjoy the writing of it first and foremost.
And Callan, you mentioned that in a few days you're going to go back on the river and do your fishing instructions and whatnot. But I'm curious, do you have another project, a writing project in the works, or something you've started, or something you plan on starting soon?
Yeah, this winter I was kind of trying to write another novel. So it's a long way away from being anything at this point. But I do just when I kind of just write in the winter, I feel like I need to get something, accomplished during that time. So I write quite a bit during that period of time when I'm not surfing. So yeah, something in the works, but I'm about to put it aside for quite a while and go fishing. So
sure.
That's all right too.
And Kevin, do you have anything in the works?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just finished a book a couple weeks ago. It'll probably be out maybe next summer, next fall.
Sure.
Nice.
Yep. So
can you tease it, or you're not allowed to talk about it?
No, sure, I'm happy to. It's a retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh set in the mountains of Southwest Virginia and the early part of the 20th century. Follows a couple Virginia boys as they go to fight in the First World War and what happens to them after they come back.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'll be keeping an eye out for that one for sure.
Appreciate it.
And we'll start to wind down now. So Kevin and Callan, where can folks find out more about you? Are you on social media? Do you have websites? Have newsletters? Where can folks keep track of you and your future works?
Well, I have Instagram, Callan.Wink, and I have a website, which is just my name, Callan Wink. So those are a couple places.
Great. Kevin?
Yeah, kevincpowers.com, and it's got links to stuff on there.
You go. Yeah, great. Now, Callan, was there anything that I should have brought up or the audience should have asked? Anything you want to leave us with that we haven't covered in the first 50 minutes or so?
No, I mean, I think it was great. It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, and Kevin, anything you want to add before we wrap things up?
No, I appreciate being here, and I hope everybody who's joined us who hasn't read the book will go out and buy it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. So I appreciate getting to be a part of this discussion tonight.
Yeah, so folks, let's give Callan and Kevin a big virtual round of applause for a wonderful conversation. For those watching live, please take the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom and look for the follow-up email from me later tonight with a link to the recording, a link to Wellesley Books, and information about some other upcoming virtual programs that might be of interest. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thanks again, Callan. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Appreciate it.